And if you haven't heard, he's been doing a lot of work with donor retention, Dr. Adrian Sargent's research around this, and of course, creating a new way for organizations to use a product called Bloomerang to help them with retention. But he'll talk about that later on towards the end. As usual, if you've attended our sessions in the past, you know that we record every session. And so if you do miss anything, don't worry. We'll make sure to get that back to you in a recording. And then Jay has offered his presentation here to you if you need it. And so in our follow-up emails, we'll make sure and get that to you too as well. And then lastly, if you need any CFRE credits, we can make sure and certify those too. So, as I was sort of planning this session together, and as we started talking about donor retention, because I'll tell you the statistics that you'll hear from Jay are not incredible. And we've got a challenge in our nonprofit community as fundraisers, in that the people that we're trying and spending so much time and energy on trying to get them to become donors are leaving us just as quick. And so what we need to do is really rethink how we do retention and work with donors to keep them hanging around, continuing to support us, and increasing that support over time. So today we're going to have a conversation together with Jay. Jay's going to present for the first 20 to 25 minutes, and I'll chime in too because I want to make sure that I learn just as like you will. I'll ask some questions, but if you have any questions, feel free to put those into your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll make sure and get to those too as well. And so I want to welcome Jay. Let me give you a little background. If you don't know anything about Jay, it's kind of surprising because he's been around in the field for some time. He's got over 29 years of technology leadership. He is probably well known for being the founder and CEO of eTapestry, if you are on that system. And then, of course, he's been involved in a lot of the thought leadership in the sector, from being on the board of the Center on Philanthropy to also being an AFP board member, ethics committee member. So he's got a wide range of experience. I think probably what's the most intriguing to me about Jay is his commitment to helping organizations really in that small to medium size categories to really figure out how to advance how they work in fundraising. And so it's always great that when we have time together, so I'm really excited that he's here. So Jay, welcome and thanks for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome, Derek. Thank you so much for inviting me today. And I know that I won't have to ask you twice to ask questions. So that's a good thing. I think you'll be good at helping me and interpret some of the data here. And thank you very much to all of those that are taking time out of their day today to be part of it. I appreciate it. As Derek said, the small and medium-sized nonprofits have always been near and dear to my heart. In fact, I sort of made it my mantra maybe 20 years ago to say, why not be able to equip any size nonprofit to compete with the national nonprofits in the form of communication and technology and things of that nature. So it's sort of been what I've been trying to do for many, many years. And in the last 10 or so years, my wife's an executive director of a public school foundation and has been involved in being a fundraiser herself for many, many years. And what's been very enlightening to me is been chairing, as you can see on the screen there, a couple capital campaigns and being involved with a lot of major gift solicitations, which changed a lot of my mindset and will lend itself to some of my interpretation of the data that we have here. So without further ado, let's just talk a little bit about what retention, and I love the quote from 101 Fundraising. Active donor commitment is the enduring passion for your nonprofit. Inspiring donors is the key for loyalty. And you're going to hear those 3 or 4 words come out quite a bit today. Loyalty, passion, commitment, active. Those are types of words that are big contributors to what the retention levels of your organization are and how you can make those come to life. Now, Derek alluded to some of the data that we're going to be talking to, but this is a slide, and I borrowed this from a fundraising consultant that I met many, many years ago by the name of Jerry Panos, and he had this slide to ask if I could use it, and it takes a look, and you can multiply the number of donors on the left here. We're starting with a nice round number of 1,000, but multiply that to whatever size your database is. And if your attrition rate is one of the 3 numbers that you see in the second column there, either 20%, 40%, or 60%, you can see how many donors you'll still have in that database at the end of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. So even at a 20% attrition rate, you only have 328. But what's really sort of scary, at a 60% attrition rate, those 1,000 loyal donors dwindle down to just 10 in just 5 short years.
And Jay, I have a question for you on this slide, because I think that some of our audience might be wondering this too. Is what's the, how is this the benchmark that we should look at, or what would you recommend you'd like to see where those numbers go? Obviously, we don't want we want attrition rates to be great, but what do you think?
Okay, every board that I'm part of, I have them aim for the attrition rate to be 30% or less, that they can have a retention rate of 70%. And I'll show you that in some of the data here in just a minute, because if you can do that, because it's never going to be the same as it is in the commercial sector. Some of you may have seen some of the comparisons that, in the commercial sector, retention rates of 80 and 90% are somewhat common, especially if someone's getting a service. And whether they continue to pay to get that service is one thing or not. But in the nonprofit world, since someone is giving to your organization rather than receiving a direct service, I don't think you're ever going to get to that 80 or 90% level. There may be a few rare exceptions, but the key point, Derek, and for the audience here, that when you see those numbers going down, this has been forcing so many nonprofits to be on this treadmill running at full speed, bringing in new first-year donors. And you always hear about acquisition, acquisition, acquisition. And the scary part is, on some of these organizations, there's just as many donors going out the back door as we're bringing in the front door. I'm on the board of the local food bank here, Derek's familiar with, and they have a national direct mail vendor that we work very closely with for all of our direct mail work. And they had been presenting their results for years, and after I got involved with Dr. Sargent, I asked at the most recent board meeting, what is our retention rate on first-year donors? And the person presenting from the direct mail firm said, do you really want me to say this in front of the entire board? I said, well, I guess that's why I asked the question. And he goes, well, and then he leaned over and asked the executive director if he could actually say the number, because the retention rate on the first year donors that they were bringing in was below 24%. Scary, huh?
Yeah, especially if you're spending all that money to try and acquire.
For true. So let's dig into some actual data.
Yeah.
The data I'm talking about is one that I've been intimately involved with because I helped lead this project many years ago. It's called the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. Catchy name, FEP for short. And it's a project to help nonprofits measure and compare. What is very unique about this is not so much the numbers. As you can see there, we've got just about 3,200 organizations that raised just over $2 billion there in the survey, but the fact that this is actual data coming from software databases. All of these participating software firms teamed up and said, we will share summary data and for the good of the cause, and then we'll be able to track exact measurements coming out of these software programs on what donor retention and donor attrition really is. And this is the first time it was done with real data rather than people filling out surveys. And as we all know, sometimes there's a difference in what people are thinking in a survey and what's actually happening in real life.
Yeah, and Jay, I have a question that's come from the audience. The question is, of the organizations that participated, was that a wide spectrum of size and budget, or was there a common average size or budget that was really kind of coming through here?
Okay, the average size organization was about $3 million in annual revenue.
Okay.
For that. The vast majority of the data is from organizations 5 million and below. And when I'm talking about 3 million and 5 million, I'm talking about what they raise in fundraising dollars.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Good question there, Derek. Okay. So let's take a look at what this retention rate was. They do this every year, and they've been doing it for the last 6 years. The retention rate in the most current period was 41%. So obviously the opposite of that is the attrition rate was 59%. So it was just 1% below that last row we were just looking at. The attrition rate was that, and it is very scary, as you can see from the icon there. That is, if most board members really knew that, I think they would really be scared to death. And you are reading your eyes correctly, is that 6 out of every 10 donors from the previous year did not donate at all the next year. Sort of scary, isn't it, Derek?
As it is, yeah, for sure.
So I don't think there's any other way of saying it except that, we need to improve for that, because there's just a lot of dollars flying out the window to do that. I pulled this infographic in so you could see the comparison between the commercial business, and this one's one of the higher ones. This was the retention rate for publicly listed technology companies, what percentage of their customers they retain from one year to the next, and compared that to the most recent data here. You can see what the data has done over the last 5 years, and you can sort of see what the retention rate was for new donors versus repeat donors. And that's where the balance between the two comes out to about 41% there. But what I think is very telling, if you look in this bottom right-hand corner, 65 of the organizations who provided data had a retention rate combined of over 70%. So there are several organizations that are doing this in such a manner that 7 out of 10 donors stay from one year to the next. And I think there's certain key elements of what their success is stemming from.
Yeah. And Jay, you'll get into that here soon.
Yes.
Great.
You alluded to, and I will queue up my expert here, because all of the research that's gone into this, probably the person who's most widely known throughout the country and the world for that matter is Dr. Adrian Sargent. He's one of the top 10 most influential people in fundraising. And his book, Building Donor Loyalty, is sort of the backbone or the Bible of this movement that you're hearing so much about right now. And he was one that stated that 10% improvement in donor retention can double the lifetime value of your donor database. And that's really, as you take a look and you play out the math that's involved there, because it works in a geometric or a multiplying manner. If you move your retention rate up 10%, that just keeps playing a bigger and bigger effect, much like taking a penny and doubling it, what number you eventually get to at the end of 30 days. This same type of multiplier effect is working here on your retention once you get that working in your organization.
So Jay, question for you. We see in the field this, and you kind of mentioned it with the direct mail provider that you're on the board with. There's this interest of constant acquisition, right? So the constant flow of trying to convince somebody for the first time to like your cause, and then your nonprofit, and then from there, hopefully that you'll stay on board. Why do you suspect there's so much attention to acquisition versus retention? Because I would say that retention now, based upon what Adrian Sargent has been doing and others, is starting to rise in, if you had to use the term, popularity. But before that, it has considerably been focused on, acquisition. What is your feeling as to why more leaning towards acquisition versus retention?
Well, being a vendor to the sector, I hate to say this, but honestly, I think a fair portion of that is vendor-driven, Derek, because there's a lot of money in donor acquisition. In fact, for most of the nonprofits, it's a losing proposition. You're going to spend $1.25 or $1.15 to raise $1, and that $1.25, most of that's going to a third-party vendor in some cases, or to some other type of system or something of that nature. So it's there's a lot of activity driving that, because it's a lot of dollars exchanging hands. And of course, if you are trying to meet any goal, one of the key aspects of that is how many new people can you add to the fold to do that. Unfortunately, not too many people were checking that, and part of it is a lot of people are on database systems or on technology where it's very difficult to actually figure the retention rate. It takes a series of 3 or 4 reports that you have to sort of meld together in a spreadsheet to figure out what your retention rate is. So hence, I don't know, maybe you could speak for that. You've been to a lot of board meetings yourself, Derek. Have you ever been to a board meeting where they spoke and said what their retention rate was from one year to the next?
Not usually, unless we force it. But yeah. And I'll say that I think you're right. I think there's this combination of both vendor but also board members, right? So there's this constant, if we get more people, quote unquote, and spend more time in that area, then that means that our brand is out there more, we're getting more money, it looks kind of good on paper to a certain extent, but when you unfold it a little bit, we realize that we're losing it on the other side to a certain extent.
Yeah, and then I think the other aspect of it is, and this is certainly not a reflection on all the fundraisers out there, but there are some people that are in the fundraising profession that, you know, are just not as comfortable, and boy, and it's really sad to say this, that are not as comfortable in building close personal relationships, you know, of picking up the phone and talking to somebody, or setting up a meeting and meeting with them face to face. You know, you're having to put yourself out there a little bit, and that's the key to donor retention, is building a donor relationship and a personal relationship, and that is that can be scary work, and that can be a lot more difficult than just sending out, you know, acquisition mailing pieces or acquisition emails or having an event and seeing how many people you can register for the event.
Yeah. Yeah. So almost those, you know, sometimes, and we've had other pieces here that we've talked about where we'll say, you know, passive forms of fundraising, where there's an instrument between you and the donor, rather than an active form, which is I'm going to go directly to the donor and speak to them about giving their gifts. So there's this interest more in potentially looking at acquisition processes that use more passive forms than there would be active forms of engagement.
Yeah, so like one of the examples Dr. Sargent gave to me, he said, a simple thing that all of your listeners out there today can do. If you know what your average gift is for your first-year donors coming into your system or into your organization, if a gift comes in that's above the midway point, that's above the average, let's say your average new gift is $128.50. If you get a gift of $129 or more, don't send that same tired thank you letter. Pick up the phone and call that person and thank them personally.
Yeah.
And his research shown, if you have a telephone conversation with a donor, their lifetime value, the number of years they're going to be with your organization, automatically goes up by 1/3.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, you can't do that for everybody, so why not pick it through? So if you've got 25 new donors that came in this week and 5 of them are above the average, maybe that should be 5 people, 5 phone calls that you add to your task list as a fundraiser or as an executive director.
Yeah. Jay, I know you got a lot here, but I want to go to a question here that's come in, and that's around and the question's worded around their database is kind of bad the way it is, right? So the people in it's been one that's been exercised and tried to get them to reacquire and get back in the fold. And the question comes around, what if the database or the people that we have who have been consistent donors with us do give, but we just have this other pool of people? Shouldn't we be spending time acquiring more people in that? So it's sort of on the fence. Where do we go if we know we might have a bad set of databases too?
Well, I tell you what, you can sort of run an experiment here and think the amount of time that you would spend on acquiring new donors that are only going to stay at a 27% retention rate. So you're really going to only keep 1 out of 4 of those new ones from one year to the next, particularly if they're event-oriented brand new donors. People that come to an event, the chances of keeping them next year drops below 20%. And apply that same amount of effort and time to people that are in your database that are already there and see for that. You know, I always find, and this wasn't from Dr. Sargent, but from another planned giving consultant that said that the number of people that could have made legacy gifts, they could have left something to the organization in their will or in a trust, that did not do so because they were never asked to do so. They never even knew that that was a possibility, that their financial planner or their attorney didn't suggest that. So, not everybody has that philanthropy background to be able to do that. And, you know, if you can get just a couple of those to occur, that could take care of all of your acquisition dollars for the next 5 years.
Yeah, true. Absolutely.
Well, like I said, the defining lifetime value on the screen right now is I always encourage every organization that we're working with to see if they can figure out. Now, lifetime value is figuring out what is the average number of years someone is a donor to your organization, and what is your average gift, and just multiplying that. So you're treating that individual not as the one-time donor or as a single gift, but what their potential value is to your organization. And once you know that, I think it makes some of the next steps come to life here, because there are certain key factors in any donor and loyalty improvement program. And one of the ways I think that helps sell this internally is to try to figure out what your costs are, particularly acquisition costs versus each category of donation revenues. What are my costs for special event versus the revenue that come in? What are my costs for major gift and personal solicitations, et cetera? To do that, if you have a handle on your costs, then you can take a look at what the revenues are. Once you know your lifetime values, you can, and then applying your retention rates, you start to be able to plan out what is the highest and best use of your time and your efforts of each member of your staff.
Okay.
And where this comes into play here is there's never been a fundraising presentation, Derek, has there, without a pyramid?
Pyramids, exactly. We love them, right?
You got to have a pyramid in there. So what we're talking about is hopefully being able to apply your efforts in the higher levels here of that pyramid for that, because many of the first-year donors are going to be in those first 2 or 3 categories, depending on how they came in. But where the retention comes into play and where the dollars really start multiplying is as people move up into these levels and they have the capacity for major gift giving and legacy giving, and just as importantly, involving you with other people that are in that same category, so that you have other prospects that are there. And that can only be done by getting to know those individuals and building a personal relationship to make that come to life.
And Jade, have you seen any data at all, either from Dr. Sargent or others, talking about in each of these segments where the attrition or retention categories are we seeing a lot of turnover in donors at I would suspect at the lower levels versus the high, or do you have any feeling any other way?
Let me back up a couple slides here, and you'll see right here the $250 gift and larger, the retention rate is much, much better than the ones that are below $250 for that. And I could dig in and get the exact numbers for that. I don't have them at my fingertips right now, but you're going to see numbers similar to these factors that you see above here with the 27 and 7.
And I would suspect it's maybe around those categories for some organizations where we start to incorporate more active forms of fundraising, where you're assigned a fundraising staff member, a board member, and others to start communicating directly with those donors at those categories and above versus lower, which would probably on the retention side, which is, maybe looking at those categories you have and saying, well, how can we begin to incorporate volunteers and staff even at the lowest levels to make sure we can help on the phone calling and the communicating to ensure we keep those retention rates to where they should.
Exactly. And let's just talk for just a second there, because when you talk about volunteers and staff, interns, et cetera, whatever the case may be, a magical practice that is so seldom used is the use of handwritten notes. Yeah. If you can, for a first-year donor, give them a handwritten note and personalize it in some way, the results are magical. Yeah. And if you can go as far as to make a phone call that truly thanks them and lets them know what the funds are going to be used for, you have a very, very high probability of that person coming back in the next time period.
Yeah, and
using these practices come into play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Jay, what the data that you're showing us and some of the trends is that if we're able to create volunteer models, like you said, either with interns or volunteers at those lowest levels, from letter writing and thank you notes all the way to calling based on scale, that you can start to curb some of these issues. I think we kind of got into it at a certain point in the conversation to say we've got to incorporate more active forms of communication and involvement and connection with these donors to help make this happen. And really, that's going to be probably the best way.
Exactly. And pulling these together, and I just pulled one screenshot out of the my product here, so that you can show what the engagement rank is and the engagement level. And we look at engagement and say that there's a lot of different ways that you can plot out the engagement, and we do that via what we call retention factors to do that. And I thought I might, if you don't mind, Derek, is share with some of these factors and see if you and the audience agrees with some of these factors, because these factors are rolled together to create that engagement level there, and that could be done by an engagement meter like you see there, or a ranking or scoring system. Some systems do it by on a scale of 1 to 100, is this person a 90, is this person an 80, etc. And I like to find it be based on more than just their ability to give, but more on all of these retention factors. And these are much like the the Kentucky Fried Chicken recipe or the Coca-Cola formula for that. Dr. Sargent has helped us take these and figure out what the ranking is. How many points do you move up or move down based upon these? So let's take a look. This first group is based upon financial transactions. Have they made a donation in the last 12 months? Did they make multiple donations? Do they have a recurring donation or a pledge that they're paying on right now? Do they have more than a year of recurring donations? And when I mean recurring, and this is very popular outside of the United States, where someone gives you their checking account number or a credit card, and you take a monthly transaction out of that to make that happen, because those people that are involved in that tend to stay at very high retention rates. Yeah. Whether they give through multiple channels, and of course the simple ones, do they upgrade, downgrade, or did they lapse in their giving? Those all move the needle or the scoring mechanism up or down.
So at the very least, Jay, what you're saying is, if we're looking at retention and donor engagement, and if we had to break down that word engagement, which is a funny word because it means a lot of things to other people, that you're saying that we should look at from a fundraising perspective these factors to help understand the level of interest and involvement that might happen from our donors.
Exactly, and these were financial ones. Let's go to the next group here. These are activities. And the simple fact of whether or not they attend events or whether they attend multiple events. And then now there's many of the technology solutions give you the ability to track actions happening in social media. And I know you're a big fan of the social media, Derek, but if someone posts on your Facebook wall or becomes a friend, should they not be considered to be more engaged? If they say something about your nonprofit on their Facebook, or do they send out a tweet with a hashtag about your event? Do they say something in LinkedIn? Do they reply to a tweet? Do they take some of your social media outreaches and resend them to other people? Those are all levels of engagement that have proven to be very strong factors on whether someone stays in the fold with you donating from one year to the next.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then other ones here like their phone number and their communication preferences and whether or not they've indicated their interest. And these are all things that we find that if we've got those in play there, the propensity for them to be at the higher levels of retention are very, very strong.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I like that. So what you're saying, and I just want to repeat this for the audience, we've got two primary categories of factors for donor retention and engagement. And that is one, a financial piece where we can track what they're doing. And then on the other category is activity and communication that surrounds, like maybe even between those donations or even in the relationship as a whole.
Right. In fact, I've got another screen that talks about the communication ones. And some of this, because so much of our communication is now electronic, it's very easy with the proper technology tools and the proper email systems to be able to know, does someone open your email? Do they click on links? Did they opt out of your emails? Have they forwarded the email on to somebody else, etc.? Those are all levels of engagement. Have they called your nonprofit? The next one is a very, very important one. Anybody that has contacted your charity and given you updated address information that they've moved, boy, keep that one on file.
Yeah.
Their chances of becoming a legacy donor just went up fourfold.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing what that means. It's other things, tracking whether or not they've been on your website and whether they've done something on your website or responded to a survey or volunteered. All, once again, communication factors and activity factors well beyond what you normally track, which is financial transactions.
Yeah. And so I think, in terms of higher level for a second, you've served on boards and others. I mean, have we, I usually see that these three categories, right? Financial, to event or participation, to communication, are not necessarily mixed together as overall factors. They're sort of even reported in board meetings as separate things, one from marketing, right, one from fundraising. It's almost like you're saying we got to actually look at it holistically.
Right. You've got to roll these all together into an overall score, which, I can't think of a better term to define it other than loyalty or engagement. How involved and how engaged is this person with our organization, and what steps can we do to move them to the next level of engagement in one way or another and make that happen? Now, my last screen here is going to talk a little bit about some of the day-to-day activities that you can do to build that engagement and that retention level up.
Perfect.
And let me run through those, and then we can open it up for overall questions then, Derek. But
yep.
First and foremost, don't make every communication an ask. Not every communication needs to be a solicitation. And the younger, and I'm not telling you anything, the millennials and the boomers, they want to know what is your performance data on achieving your mission. So I'm a big believer in drip feeding or making that a regular type of communication that goes out saying, this is our mission and this is how well we're doing in accomplishing that. Any data that you have there, the younger generations are going to soak that up like a sponge and want to make full advantage of that. And Derek, I don't know if there's anything you want to add about that, but that's one of the most important areas.
Yeah, and we have seen that in a lot of the data that we have done where, progressively communicating this is what your money has done, this is where we're serving people, and reinforcing that throughout the year through that communication has made a big difference in donor engagement.
Now, the next part of it is just thinking about it as terms of building a relationship, especially once you get to the mid part of that pyramid and up. Think about how you develop any sort of a friendship, connecting often, and making sure that there's all these numerous touch points as you see there. And then once you get enough information, allowing segmentation to make things more personal. So if someone's got an interest in certain aspects of your nonprofit, let's say you're an educational institution and they care about the athletic programs, or they care about the arts, or they care about adult education in some way, or upper levels of different things. Whatever that segment is that they're concerned about, try to personalize your communications so that you're letting them know more and more about that, and then where they can go about making a difference in that. Because my last point is the sweetest music to anybody in the form of communication is letting them know what their dollars or what their monies are doing to achieve your mission. People want to know that, and if so, it goes beyond just making a donation. It means that they are psychologically and involved and attached at the hip with your mission and making it happen. And that's where I think so many charities, I hate to say this, Derek, but I've had customers that the day we installed the system, we helped them develop a thank you letter. Yeah. And I went back 10 years later, and guess what letter they were still using?
The same one.
Same one, and to every single person. It didn't matter whether you were a $10 online donor or whether you were a $1,000 sponsor to a gala, you got the same thank you letter.
Yeah.
It was sort of scary.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, Jay, we've got some, I think you're here as well, and, kind of give us a few conclusionary pieces. I want to remind everybody, give us their questions right now as Jay finishes up. We've got some coming in already, so Jay, go ahead and finish, and we'll get to the questions.
Okay, good. My conclusion is that what we're really striving for is those key lovable words of satisfaction, commitment, engagement, which leads to donor trust and donor loyalty. And I always do this exercise when I'm in seminars face-to-face. Now, it may not be as good over the phone here, Derek, but we're going to get a try. If everybody out there could just close your eyes for just a second and think about what you would do if you could double the lifetime value, if you could double the amount of money you're raising in your donor database over the next several years, what that would mean to your mission. Now, you can go ahead and open your eyes up right now and think about that, but this trust and loyalty factor really can. If you could move it up 10 or 12 points, you can double the lifetime value. And I'll sort of leave you with that thought. So, Derek, let's open it up for questions.
Yeah, and so one of the questions that we have from is around here. It says, when it comes to thanking a donor, would it be better to send a personal phone call or a personal handwritten note? Jay, what do you think?
I vote for the personal phone call for that. Even if you leave a voicemail message, the fact that they hear your voice and they know you're reaching out and they've got a chance to connect back to you, I think that's very powerful to be able to do that. And then my next step would be, if you can mark that in your database that you did a phone call, the next time maybe do the personal note and do a little mixing and matching and see which one gets the biggest response. Because if you send out a handwritten note and they call you, but they didn't call you when you left a phone message or a voicemail message, you know which one to do in the future.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. So we're almost saying, maybe as fundraising in departments, is creating different options and graduated, thanking, recognition, and engagement that says, the first time we're going to do this, we're going to increase that value the next time by doing X, Y, Z, and so on.
Yeah. And this is a great little strategy session that you can have with your team at your nonprofit, or maybe in some cases involving your board and saying, what are all the innovative ways that we can communicate and thank people for supporting our organization? And just by the fact that you think of them, maybe people will stop sending that 10-year-old thank you letter out.
Yeah,
boy, I hope so.
Yeah, and I think that because I know that we've worked on projects where, and I'm kind of going back to your triangle one, where it was that those that were in the lower categories, obviously there were smaller touch points than they were at the larger categories of major donors. Where we have an organization working with where at a certain level and above, they get a video thank you from the executive director or the board chair. Now, granted, that's a lot of resources, and it's only for a few select because they couldn't do that for everybody. But then lower, as they go down the chain of giving and donors, obviously they try to incorporate as many personal touches. And because they have so many donors on the lowest level, it tends to be a little bit more communication, electronic, and handwritten notes than it is at the higher scales. But those are all different options, too, to think about.
Yeah, and there's an experiment you can try that sort of dovetails on an experiment I had for many years, is take 10 or 20 people that are at that smaller level and go ahead and do the special thing where you make a phone call or you send a handwritten note, even though they may only be a $25 donor.
Yeah.
And track those 20 people or those 30 people over the next year or so and see if it made a difference. You may find that if one of those comes on and becomes a major donor and makes a $10,000 gift, then it might be worthwhile doing that for more and more segments and see what happens there. And if you don't mind, Derek, can I share a story of
please do. Go ahead.
I did with my employees at eTapestry? One of the things that I used to do with new employees that was quite revealing, I would give them $50 of company money, and I would ask them to go make either 5 $10 donations or 10 $5 donations, and I told them to split it up. I want you to make part of them online and part of them through the mail or whatever, and try to reach out to 5 or 10 different nonprofits. And I said, mix it between local and national, and report back to me in 90 days who built a relationship with you and who did not.
Yeah.
And it was quite enlightening because some of those employees of mine are still loyal donors to this day to somebody who built a relationship with them for a $5 gift.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. And this question is a very interesting one. And given that you are and have developed all these technology solutions for the field, so I'd love to hear what you think. The question is, Jay, would love to get your opinion. Don't you think email is a little impersonal? Thoughts?
Yes, I certainly do. Given the choice between an email and a phone call, I always would lean toward that. And and see. It's just a matter of quantity,
Yeah.
and some organizations that there's no other way. Now, it also, believe it or not, that's my opinion, but we have to give the donor the utmost opinion. And one of the things that I think, besides a proper thinking mechanism, I think it's very important within 60 days of any new person coming on board to your organization as a donor, that in some way, shape, or form you send out a short survey and have them tell you what is their preferred form of communication. Do they like the phone? Do they like written mail? Do they like email? And let that drive your future communications with each individual person.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and really at that point you're also getting not only more data on your on some of your individuals, but you're going to be able to tailor stuff a lot better going forward to try and make sure that you get those emails opened and some of that communication actually happens.
Right, and just the fact that you sent out a survey, nearly everybody wants to give their opinion, and if it's presented in the right manner, the fact that they took the survey, and I highly recommend not any more than 5 or 6 questions for the very first one. Make it a very short and simple survey that they can get back to easily. And the fact that they answered that survey is a very big indicator of the beginning part of engagement.
Yeah. So we have a question from Heather. She says, how often should you change the thank you letter? And then if we are already sending a handwritten notes and then sending typed thank you letters for tax purposes, will donors even notice at all? Thoughts?
I think they will. I honestly think that your thank you letter should be changed every time you're communicating with each individual person, if you can, to do that. And the best way to do that is to have sort of a stack of them, and I stack them in your system, and you can say, this is our thank you letter for a first-time donor, second-time donor, third-time donor. Now, you may use up, if someone gives to you 5 times in the first year, you may do that, but I would have them be based upon what number time they are making donations with you and have a different thank you letter. So it's not so much that you're changing the thank you letter, but you have a pool of them or a stair-stepping group of them that you have a different one for different purposes or for the different occurrences that they come in from.
So Jay, here's another question, and this kind of goes along the line with an earlier discussion around loyalty. You've sort of framed up 3 major categories of financial participation and communication, and all these sub things there. And one of the things is that there might be, and this kind of comes into the question, is what if somebody is an incredible loyal person, but they just haven't sort of queued onto your system yet? They do like you, and it might be one of those where they just give you a donation once a year, and might be an older donor who doesn't sign up for anything or participate in anything. Do you have any thoughts on how you measure their loyalty or engagement too?
Well, that one is going to balance itself out because they will be one of those individuals that's giving you X number of years in a row.
Yeah.
And we give real high weighting. Once someone gets to the 3rd year and they've given to you 3 years in a row, the chances of them giving 4 years in a row is like 90%.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is just ask any direct mailer. And you really don't have to do too much with them. Just be aware that that is somebody that's been a multi-year consistent donor, and that's going to rank just as much as somebody that's doing a lot of social media tweeting and everything else and has maybe only given 1 gift. That person who's given multiple years in your normal channels is going to rank higher because we know that the facts speak for themselves there.
Yeah. All right. So I really love this question. So it is our board.
Should we give out a gold star to somebody?
I have to. It says, like you said earlier, that our board is very interested in acquiring new donors and building our donor base. What would you have me tell our board about why we should focus on retention? What would make you as a board member listen?
Just take a spreadsheet and, well, first of all, figure out what your retention is and what your average number of years that a donor is on board with and your average gift. If you know your average gift and the number of donors you had last year, and apply your retention rate on a spreadsheet. Let's say for the sake of numbers, you had 1,000 donors last year. for that, and your retention rate's 50%.
Yeah.
Take that spreadsheet out 5 years showing 50% of these people dropping off, and then do another one at 60%, and you know that your average donor, their gift goes up 10% a year, showing both of them there what the dollar amount is, and have your board look at the resulting number in the bottom right-hand corner of the spreadsheet.
Good. Yeah. So the numbers, so in what you're saying is the numbers won't lie at that point.
Oh, you will scare you, and then when you show them how much they actually make on acquiring new donors, and you compare that to someone going from a 50% retention rate to a 60% retention rate, that 10% difference as it plays out over 5 years will be thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah. So this question comes in and says, do you rank higher communication versus participation at events versus giving? Which one of those would you say ranks higher in sort of this larger equation?
Giving is the highest ranking one.
Right.
The actual gifts coming in and the regularity of those and multiple channels and all is always going to be a higher rating factor. Next are activities. You'll notice the order that I presented them in was the financial first, then the activities, and then the communications. And then with the communications being the last area there for that. It's a good indicator, but it's not as foolproof as year to year to year giving.
Yeah, and so the proof is in the pudding there with the donors and dollars, so as well.
Exactly, and it may just be the ability of somebody to be able to give too. You know, someone can be that, and so that's where if you can go as far as tracking the relationships in your database, someone may be a very loyal supporter, does not have the means to give themselves, but they've been responsible for bringing in several major gifts or legacy gifts by people they've introduced your charity to.
Yeah.
I've always said it's very important to know exactly what happens 2 or 3 years down the road to your table captains and the people that they invited to be at their table. Some of those are absolutely phenomenal, and you want to be calling them and thanking them for the people that they brought in as well as their own donations.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a couple questions around the presentation. Yes, don't worry, we'll get you a copy of that following up after that. Jay has been really wonderful with that. Okay, one of our last questions, and then definitely want to ask you about Bloomerang real quick. That is, how does a small organization like us get started? What would you suggest be the first thing that we do, and then maybe the second?
Okay, if you're, depending on the size, small is always relative.
Yeah.
If you're not tracking things in some sort of a program, that's always a good step. Whether it's you just start off with a spreadsheet, good record keeping lends itself to being much more diligent with your donors and being able to communicate with them better, because people want to know, as long as it's a taxable deduction, what all their transactions added up to over the year and what they're doing. So I would urge any small organization to really think about record keeping and doing that in such a manner that it's easy for the organization to keep that record keeping going from one person to the next, because unfortunately the record keeping function often falls to the newest employee at many nonprofits, and a lot of times one of the lower paid employees, even though that's where all of the data for where your financial support is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jay, I'm going to summarize here, and then I want to ask you about Bloomerang. So really great content today. Got some really good pieces around sort of what is this donor loyalty and what retention is really happening. Loved the fact that we've got 3 major categories to measure that engagement and loyalty, from financial to communication and some of our activity participation. And I'm excited to hear, because I think you've incorporated this into the new project and software that you're developing now. So give us a sense of what it is.
Yeah, the whole idea of Bloomerang came about with my conversations with Dr. Sargent, and I think the audience will get a kick out of this, because I asked Dr. Sargent, I said, you've written multiple books, many papers, you've spoken at almost every national conference. Are people paying attention to what you're saying? And there was this long, long pause, and he grabbed his chin a couple times, and he said, not really. He said, the statistics are going downward instead of upward. And I looked at him, I said, well, you know my background. I said, would you be interested in making your best practices and your ideas come to life in a software program that would teach best practices and help enforce them. And it took him literally about a second and a half, and he said, "I'm in."
Good.
So that was sort of fun to see, and that's what the Bloomerang product is based upon. Several key concepts. One is enabling the best practices, but anytime someone comes into the program, you immediately know what your retention rate is for your entire database or any subsection of it, and you also know the engagement level automatically for every name in the database. So if they've done any one of those factors that we looked at those 3 screens from, it's going to register there, and that becomes part of your reporting and being able to see that. And then the other item that we wanted to make sure happened was it was so ruthlessly simple, it did not require training. We didn't want the excuse that the executive director or the VP of development, that the system was too complicated for them to put all their notes in. And we want it to be a tool so people stop putting things into Outlook and stop putting things into Word and actually put it someplace where it can be part of the permanent record of the organization, and they would know from year to year to year what the hopes and dreams and ideas were from everywhere from the small to medium to large donors in the database.
Very cool. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I know that it's been one of those exciting things that you're working on, and I'm glad to see that we're starting to nail down what that donor engagement and retention is, because we do, and we see it from the groups that we work with and to what we continue to encounter with organizations on this webinar, that we have retention issues and we've got to start to address them. And it could save us some money long term and really build the donor base back up. So glad to hear it.
Okay. And if there's any specific questions that people have, my email address is there, and no problem at all. Feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll make sure and get the appropriate information to you, that in addition to what Derek's doing with the slides. Great.
And everybody on the webinar, thank you for attending today. As usual, we get out about 5 minutes beforehand to make sure you get to that next meeting. And so we'll make sure and send this back to you. We'll get you a copy of the slides if you want it, and also a video recording. As usual, I appreciate all the time that you spent with us. Jay, thank you. It was very helpful.
Thank you, Derek.
All right, everybody, take care. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.